If you have not been here before, we have been using illustrations from tattoos. And it's been wonderful that most of the tattoos that we have used have all been on people who attend this church. We have been given the gift of hearing stories that are so deep, and I just am amazed that people would share them with us, that they would let us be a part of that story. The first Sunday, I talked about how the Imago Dei, the image of God, that we believe from the Hebrew Scriptures that we are made in the image of God, and that is a beautiful and good thing. And that the things that happen in our lives and the marks that other people try to put on us, that none of them can block out the beauty of the creation from the artist who made us. That is just one of the things that we have talked about. And this week is going to be the first week that I am going to talk about tattoos and marks that are not actually hopeful and life-transforming. I've been using this book, Inked, and a lot of the story in this book is about one man. And he is a professional baseball player, and his name is Josh Hamilton. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of him. He was a Texas Ranger for many years. And Josh was a very, very gifted athlete to the point that he was drafted out of high school into professional baseball. He was involved in a car wreck that changed his life forever, and he was injured and could no longer play. Well, he was injured to the point that he couldn't play baseball immediately, and also his parents were in that car wreck. And so he says that he lost his family and his baseball all in that accident. As a result of that, he became addicted to pain medication from his back surgeries and pain that he had. But he also, in his despair and his not being able to play baseball, started hanging out at a tattoo parlor. And he talks about how he didn't even care what tattoos were put on him, that he would just go and sit, and the artist put whatever he wanted on him, marked him permanently with whatever he wanted. And so one of the tattoos that he lives with for now and forever is one of a hollow-eyed demon that is marked on his skin. And he says that in that process, is hanging out there, he said he met a lot of good people, but at the same time he met people that led him into drug abuse, and he became a serious addict. And he has this wonderful quote in here where he says, without God, I am just a drug addict who has baseball skills. And so his story is one of transformation where he was marked. I think it tells here how many tattoos that he has. Over 60. 40% of people born between 1961 and 1981 have at least one tattoo. For the 60% of us who don't have a tattoo, Josh Hamilton has done his share of picking up the slack. But long before the outfielder for the Texas Rangers ever thought of getting the first of his 26 tattoos, Josh was marked by a dream to play baseball. He wrote a book called Beyond Belief, Finding the Strength to Come Back. He explained his original ink began to be smudged when he was in a major car accident in 2001, resulting in his back injury. When asked to explain the meaning behind each of his 26 tattoos, Josh half laughs. And he says, the truth is, most of the time, I wasn't even interested in what they were putting on my body. The artists were in charge. And left in charge when they included a number of demons on his body. He said that what they started out as a release became a master to obey. A master that first showed up in a premonition during his first summer in the pros. He tells a story about how he thought that God was calling him and that he ignored it completely. One fateful day in October 2005, Josh woke up after a crack binge in a hot trailer surrounded by strangers. He'd loaned his truck to a dealer to get more drugs, but the guy had never come back. He walked trance-like down a 2-lane highway, eventually found a payphone where he called his estranged wife, Katie, for a ride. And he admits he was a bad husband and a bad father, and he had no relationship with God at all. And at that point, he didn't even care about baseball anymore. But his wife picked him up and she told him about a dream she'd had where God had told her that he was going to bring Josh back. And he just blew her off. But his wife was unwilling to let him back into her life, and so she dropped him off at his grandmother's house. And he tells a story about how in the middle of the night when he had a dream that he was wrestling with a demon, that he was so afraid that here he was, this huge man that went and knocked on his grandmother's bedroom door and asked if she would let him sleep there because he was so afraid. And so that night was the beginning of his healing. He says between God and his grandmother that he was brought back from the brink of death. And so Josh's story, today's lectionary text from the book of Psalms, made me think of Josh's story because of how dark it is and how lost he was. And so today, if you would like to join me, I'm going to read to you from Psalm 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and foes, they shall stumble and fall. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war rise up against me, yet I will be confident. One thing I asked of the Lord, that will I seek after, to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. For he will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble, and he will conceal me under the cover of his tent, and he will set me high on a rock. Now my head is lifted high above my enemies all around me, and I will offer in his tent sacrifices with shouts of joy. I will sing and make melody to the Lord. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So the subtitle on this book, Inked, is called Choosing God's Mark to Transform Your Life. And I really struggled with how do I wrap up this series where I talked about these significant marks that has transformed people's lives into choosing God's mark for your life. Because I'm one of those people that I don't have a lightning bolt story about when I became a Christian. I went to church from the time, my earliest memory is 6 years old, sitting on a pew with 4 generations of my family in Okmulgee, Oklahoma. And there was never a time where we didn't go to church. It was who we were. It was what we were about. My parents and my grandparents, they served on every committee at one time or another. My daughter once asked me what kind of people we were. She was friends with a family that went to the lake every weekend. And she wanted to know why we didn't go to the lake. And I said, we're not lake people. And she said, what kind of people are we? And I said, I don't know, let me think about that. And so then I said, well, we're kind of sports people. She said, no, we're not. We don't have tickets to anything. I was like, you're right. We're not really sports people. So then I said, I think we're food people. We celebrate things with food. When we're unhappy, we soothe ourselves with food. We used to laugh that when we were eating one meal, we were planning the next meal in my my mom's family. And so then I said, well, we're food people. And then, I don't know if it was John or Hillary, one of them said, no. We're church people. That's who we are, and that's what we do. I never really thought of it that way, that we were church people. And so I don't have a story where I can tell you that I was really bad and I was drug addicted and trying to articulate what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be a faithful disciple. I don't have that kind of story to wow people and to draw them in and to give them that I want to be part of that. Mine is so simple. It just grew and grew and grew. And the people in the congregation where I was raised, they loved me well. And they were on top of me. I knew if I was out of line, there were 50 people who would tell me to get back in line. I knew that if I was in a place where I shouldn't be, there was going to be people whose names I didn't even know would get me back in line. And so I had this sense of assurance that I was cared for, that I was loved, that God was present in my life. And so as a minister, when I get to the point where I try to articulate to you, what does it mean to be faithful? What does it mean to be a disciple? What does it mean to claim that Christ makes a difference in your life? It's hard. It's hard. Because it's so many things. One day Mindy Mayberry asked me why I was so joyful all the time. I said, I don't know. I mean, I wake up that way. I go to bed that way. I am thankful for all that I have and all the gifts I've been given. And I think that is the process of the nurture of the church on my soul. I think that knowing that on your darkest days, on the days when you wonder how in the world can I get up and get out of bed, to know that you have a relationship with a Creator who thinks you're special and wonderful and good and worthwhile. I can't explain to you what that does to your soul, what that comfort and fills and joys that it gives you. And so I looked up some of the Methodist things that are written about what it means to be a disciple or a Christian. Josh Hamilton's story is a profound one. He was on a path of destruction that is visibly marked on his body for everyone in the world to see, a constant reminder of where he has been and where he has come from. But what changed in Josh, and what changes in everyone who claims a faithfulness is the mark on your heart. It's not a mark on your body, it's a mark on your heart that changes who you are. And it's a permanent mark as well, but it is not easily visible to the world. The truth is that most people say they cannot tell the difference between a Christian and an unchristian. And that is not the way it should be. Theology is not just about the study of God. It is also about us. We live our life out of understanding that we are in a relationship with God, to one another and to our world. The Christian faith is grounded in love and the grace of God, experienced through Jesus Christ, but even witnessed to us from the Hebrew Scriptures, all the way back to the story of creation, where Adam and Eve are told that if they eat of the fruit, they will die. But instead, they are cast out of the garden. That even at the very beginning of our stories of faith that teach us about the nature of God, there is this sense of forgiveness and grace. The church calls our response to this grace and love our discipleship. Discipleship focuses on actively following in the footsteps of Jesus. As Christian disciples, we are not passive spectators. We are energetic participants in the world. Because of what God has done for us, we offer our lives back to God. We order our lives in a way that embodies Christ's influence on our families, our work, our community, and our world. When Jesus was asked, what were the two most important commandments? You should know these because I say them all the time. But he said, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. So So discipleship simply begins with loving God back. It is more than just an acknowledgement that God exists or a statement of belief that you can recite regarding God. It is total devotion, head over heels in love with God. It is a deep desire to know God and to let God work on who you are. And then the second commandment that he talks about is the loving of your neighbor. Oh wait, I skipped. John Wesley, who founded the Methodist movement, he talked about things called means of grace. Means of grace are ways that you can love God and know God more. And those are prayer, Bible study, worship, fasting. I don't know how many of you do that. Or I only do it usually during Lent. Or for a hunger strike to raise money for hungry people. But even being in conversation with other people of faith to help when you are weak in your faith, to be in conversation and community with others. We live in a world now that often says, I'm spiritual but not religious. I find God in nature, not in church. And the reality is, I feel closest to God in nature myself. But I also know that I am much more fragile when I am not in a community of faith. That when I have my doubts and my dark days, there are other voices that text me or talk to me or call me and they say, Heather, calm down. It's going to be okay. And so there's something beautiful about being in community and lifting and supporting each other. These practices help us spend time with God. They make us more disciplined about our faith, that we don't just take it for granted, and that we, like all things, the more you exercise them, the stronger they begin to be. So the second one is loving your neighbor. Jesus responds to this question by quoting Hebrew scripture about the admonition to love God with our whole being. And then he says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. These verses about loving God and loving neighbor are the great commandment. We cannot do one without the other. Do you get that? We're not good at loving our neighbor without first being loved by God. We are not good at loving God if we hate our neighbors. If we constantly find fault with others around us, if we constantly criticize, if we constantly mark other people with negativity, we cannot be loving God. Because he so clearly says that I have made them as well as I have made you. And that makes them sacred and good. Christian ministry is the expression of the mind and mission of Christ by a community of Christians that demonstrate a common life of gratitude and devotion, witness and service, celebration and discipleship. All Christians are called in their baptism to this ministry of being a servant to the world. And I was telling the guys earlier when we were setting up that as a church starting from scratch who didn't have a single thing, that I ran over to Mardell's to buy a cross. And they're so expensive. I was shocked to get one that is significantly large. And that this was the only one that was on the clearance table. And it was $19.99. And but what's so wonderful is it's exactly, if I could have had all the money in the world and picked any cross in the store, it's exactly the one I would have wanted. Because in the midst of this cross is the image of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. This is the servant Jesus. This is the one who puts others before himself. It's hard to explain to other people what the covenant of Christian community is about if we do not talk about it and think about it. It is easy to become people of the world, in the world, and that other people cannot see our faithfulness in our lives. We all do it. We all slip back into the regular way of being. But the reality is, even a small group of people like this can change the world in significant ways by just treating people as Jesus would treat them. A man who talked to the stranger, who embraced the leper, who had great debate with a woman who he said compared to a dog picking up scraps. That he would encounter the woman at the well and offer her living water so that she may never thirst again. This is what we are called to. It is huge and it is hard. But it is so wonderful and transforming. And even someone like Josh Hamilton, who has this horrible darkness and this despair that almost ended his life, could find his way back. That mattered to God in a way that he now uses his faith and his story to change other people's lives. You have a story. All of you have a story. I hope you will practice articulating what that is. So when you're asked, like me, to try to explain it, that you can say, this is what God has done for me. This is why I am joyful. This is why I live a life of thankfulness and gratitude. This is why I love my neighbor. Because that is the mark of God's mark on your heart and on your life. And you will never, ever be the same. Amen.
Amen.